Morning Light. Without mention of blossoms, Miłosz gets the tree in the poem from translucent to laden with fruit. Years passed, not days, while he slept, and that tree must have flowered many times. In the same way, we turn over mid-dream or after love those beautiful hours we know were passed in the company of genius, but have forgotten in the particulars. We know the tree stands for promise, and for the desire, which comes much later, for atonement. We stand at the west-facing window and let the buildings opposite turn gold, then back to brick. 3 sections from Obelisk. Mist over the river, mirrored in the river. Distant hills rising behind distant hills, blue resolving to pink in the dawn mist. Everything curves away from the dam, even the island, barren except for equipment, the yellow shed, bright tarps, narrow road, power lines. The dam's unfinished end gapes. Cranes sit idle on its face and ridge. It's the kind of scene you might find on paper money. A minuscule barge crosses. Upriver, in a house near the shore, a young doofu dreaming of dolphins wakes to the distant steady pounding, high in the hills, of machines dismantling a village. We're standing on steel bleachers, alone except for a crow. It's the weekend, no one is working. We've walked a long way uphill from a locked gate. Tire tracks and a trail of blood on the road. Hunters have been here. The pit spreads out in a wide crescent, a white sea, a drained sea, a gash, a crater, a moonscape with roads and stationary machines like toys, a carved marble stage set for a play. Looking at it is like looking at a town in a valley from a descending jet. Looking at ourselves on the descent. When the bear came, I was searching for blackberries near the quarry. I had already walked through a wet hollow where wild mint grew and gathered some. I was carrying the mint in my pocket, pinching it and sniffing its oil on my fingers, when the movement came, a dark fleck drifting down the side of my vision. The bear did not notice me till I stepped back, brambles grazing my arms and face. A shadow moved in and settled, enclosing us, a shadow with an odor like mineral ash. I don't know why, but I held out the bunch of mint, held it straight out from my chest at arm's length, held it still, nothing but brambles supporting me. The bear studied me, then grunted and turned over a rock, swatted the ground she'd opened, and moved off into the woods, which folded around her. Forgive me, I thought it was just wind in the marsh reeds. I am 17 and about to disappear forever. I don't even know what Sant'Elena is. I've never seen an alabaster temple in a field of grain, moonlight like combed hair. Facing the sun, I find more shadow than light, trees using light to become invisible. That thing we never think of courses under everything. Rain keeps coming back. That's why bagpipes were invented. Will the dragons put much stock in bullfrog futures once the sites and even the tools of extraction are used up? Excising what isn't useful. The map we bring with us isn't useful, and the rest is work. A pine cone drops to the ground. Those men in the ring like dogs, did they choose that? Do they dream of picnics stretching long into evening? 2 sections from Ode. They rest lightly on the invisible floor, these clouds, glowing with inner buoyancy, gray and glowing with imminence. all the greys on the grayscale lolling, lightly resting their porpoise bodies, their eel selves, weed strands, bobbling ocean junk. If all the souls lost at sea this decade stood on each other's shoulders, the tycoons, troops, tourists, students, sailors, politicians, pirates, pilots, pets, honeymooners, flight attendants, fishermen, drunkards, divers, criminals, citizens, children, they'd reach the bellies of these clouds, so the one on top could strike them, and such pearls would spill out, bright confetti of lives and portions of lives yet to live would spill down, smothering everything with unspeakable richness. Instead, the world is covered in snow, which returns to the sky only to fall again, though I beg for plum blossoms and would settle for feathers. The sky is thumping us on the head like a stern teacher from an old book no one reads anymore, shouting, "Fools! Have you learned nothing?" When form changes, meaning changes, but my father's gaze is my father's gaze, whether I'm beside him with my hand on his good arm or just looking at him in a photograph, or catching his grin in the last few leaves of the maple flashing and waving. Summoned is a mild word for it. I reach up to the curtains, and if I'm not careful, I'll pull the whole contraption down. Lost and found. The checkout clerk was a certain age and very blonde. The packer was young, his eyes like sponges, taking everything in, looking everywhere but in the bags he was packing. He was packing the bags by feel, fixed on something else, quick, not fumbling exactly, but undistinguished by grace. Grace would have been a good name for the cashier, who was large of voice and gesture, shapely, and vocally very happy. She was proud, effusive, made great claims of love for everyone at work, her family of work. I was reminded of Vula, who ran the Sunset Bar on the highest street in town on an island I stayed on for a while. She sat with me at a table once to answer a question. I'd spent the day walking along the Roman road bordered by pines to an inland hill town where everything was closed, so I continued down to the western coast through pines and cypress and overgrown fields and kicked around in the edges of waves getting doused and pliable. The walk back through the pine forest restored me. I was stopped by a line of mourners threading up from the edge of town to the church in the central square. I wanted to watch, but not to seem to, so slanted my watching downward. One of the crones stepped aside and approached me, closed her hand over mine, pressing a packet of sesame snaps into my palm, staring straight into my eyes. I'd never been so seen. When the procession had passed, I walked on, refreshed myself at the tavern where men were setting up for the funeral feast, not open really, but willing to sell me a beer. Then I retraced the ancient way back to where I was staying. After a nap in which I dreamed of nothing, I wandered out to the Sunset Bar and asked Vula my question. Why she did gave me a stranger? I could see Vula searching the words. Her face grew clear and intent. She looked away and looked back, and then opened her arms slightly and flattened her palms, the burning end of her cigarette brushing the blue tabletop. And she pinched up her shoulders. There's a lexicon of shrugs in some languages. She found the words in the shrug and spoke them like it was not a foreign language to her. Because you are people. This is the way Grace at the checkout on the last day of November told me about her job. And at the end, after the flurry of declining free delivery and donating the free roll of holiday wrapping paper to the community center collection box, I'd lost track of my gloves, and in pawing through my bags, I found a bunch of bananas that belonged to the guy ahead of me. Fortunately, he had accepted the free delivery, so Grace dispatched the young packer to add them back to his box. Out in the car, repacking my bags, I found 2 English cucumbers, a kilo of tomatoes, and a box of 3.25% milk I didn't recognize, so I took those back inside. This time the young packer's eyes swam uncertainly as Grace's ebullience changed shade from what I'd call sparkling to something more like just sparks. And I remembered suddenly I'd meant to buy milk and had forgotten, so tried to make a joke of how it was a good thing for me. But we were both a little awkward, the packer and me in seeing his mistake and he in being seen, and Grace sent him off somewhere, scolding him like you might a dog, and went back to pulling people through her line. And I went off and got my milk, and when I went back through her line, it took her a minute to remember me. And maybe she didn't really. I mean, who could remember every person that passed through her line on a busy morning? But maybe she did. And anyway, we shared a laugh, and the same young man handed over my bag with the same shy smile. It's what we all want, isn't it? A crackly crust, good solid structure underneath, chewy and marvelous. A story. In town, people were unzipping their coats, carrying knit hats. It was the kind of day strangers step aside for each other readily, bestowing small gestures, the shoulder pull, the bent arm aside, the chin tuck, the almost nod. I cruised the block and parked in the last spot behind an idling truck. It was the shady side, and I found it a different world when I got out and began to walk. A world of clutched fabric and flapping ends, rough winds roiling up among buildings. A phrase from an old song came to me about walking on the sunny side of the street, meant, I knew, as a lesson about complaining. Such simplification is a hallmark of moral lessons. Can it ever be otherwise? Learning happens in retrospect, except in those most charged and fortunate circumstances when it drops on us like clear northern light. The day before, I had walked the back field through gem fires bursting from snow. This, I thought, this is my beating heart. Nothing had ever been more exciting or exact. The world had opened, revealed its inner minerals. I had no sense of having left my body, the way sometimes I have felt beside myself, felt left. Yet my body too could have been flaring out, maybe was. Was it a vision of the end? I came indoors, made coffee, went to my study as usual. Each time I spoke of it, reduced it a little, while expanding it in my mind. This is how we reach knowledge of others, finding what we cannot make understood. Did we share a smile as we approached the door, you and I? The story lies. All stories lie. They are like snow, bodies formed by solidification of elements, with regular repeating structures of atoms and faces. Most of the time, they are all we have, selves we reach out to or hurry past, depending.